Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I discuss innovation in our industry. We talk to Wes Knapp about his work at NatureServe, extinct plants, and share a ton of field stories. And finally, there are more trees on Earth than stars in the galaxy. What? According to a study published in Nature, there are about 3 trillion trees on our planet. This far outpaces the measly 100 to 400 billion stars estimated to exist in the Milky Way. How about that?
Pretty cool stuff.
Okay, it's taking me a minute to even comprehend those numbers, but yeah, that's wild.
How do they know? I mean, you could read the study, I guess, but that seems like a lot of trees. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some people listening who could verify or deny that claim.
It's in Nature. It seemed right. You know,
right?
It seemed like an internet thing where I was like, there's no way this is true. And I was like, oh, no, it's published in Nature. Okay.
Right. Cool. Well, if anybody thinks that's wrong, let us know. Okay, hit that music.
Registration is now open for NAEP's next Advanced NEPA workshop on Wednesday, November 9th from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Eastern. These workshops are intended to provide participants with practical tips and tools about how to refine preparation and review of environmental documents prepared pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act. Check it out at www.naep.org.
And now for Nic's sponsor.
Are you tired of being organized? Introducing the Disorganizer. It will come into your house and destroy everything. They are about 4 pounds and they meow a whole lot, but I'm telling you, these things are for you.
If you love that, great. If you don't, become a sponsor so we can fill it with your ad. Let's get to that segment.
From his interview, I say that one of the things that there are a couple of times that he talked about, this thing didn't exist in my field, so I did it. And it's not even, it wasn't even like this small little thing. It was like, oh, this book is outdated by 50 years. Let me spend 10 years updating it. And that is a daunting task. It is wildly difficult to do. And it didn't faze him in the least. He's like, hey, this is a tool that's going to be really useful for us going forward. Let's do it. Why not? Come on, let's go. And there wasn't hesitation. There wasn't fear. There wasn't any of that. He's just like, well, there's a need and I'm going to fill it and I'm going to figure out how, and then I'll do it. And I thought that was really, really cool. Really, really inspiring, truthfully, because I think a lot of times it's easy to just do what you've been doing and complain about the stuff that doesn't exist. You know, there's no easier way to do this. No, there is. There's always an easier way. So I don't know. I think innovation is, it scares a lot of people, but there's a good balance between being wildly out there and actually doing something proactive about a need that you have in the industry. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, just being a proactive person like that is fantastic. You know, last week we talked about resumes and stuff. Just be proactive.
Yeah.
Get out there and make stuff happen. But there's also like this whole thing in management and stuff where, you know, when you talk about innovation, there are some schools of thought that are like, you have to do user testing and you have to go out and make sure your idea is going to fit a certain niche of people, when really, like, I think most innovations come from, I need this thing. It doesn't exist. I'm going to go make it.
Yeah, exactly. User testing something. If you know your industry well enough, and he worked with plants, he knows that how to ID them, what's missing in the field, then yeah, you're going to know that this is going to be valuable. If you're talking with people in the industry and they all are complaining about the same thing, that's a clue that maybe we need something that's not here.
Yeah. And sometimes just because you're so in it, you yourself represent the industry and you just can kind of know by gut feeling, you know, like this thing doesn't exist anywhere, or I can't find it, or the thing that does exist doesn't work the way I want it to. And then you go make it better.
Right. And we're seeing that happen across the board with technology in general. Just being able to have easier access to information is changing a lot of the way we do what we do. And, you know, it's historically a very slow process to update. But now, you know, instead of a 3-year gap between the study and the publication, that time is windowing down to way shorter times. And even that helps push things forward, right? But there's still going to be gaps. There's still a lot of innovative technology in our phones that we aren't really tapping into. You know, there aren't great apps for some of what we do. And how do you do one for policy, right? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But even just having a database or repository for information is extremely helpful, extremely valuable. The upkeep is usually the hard part, right? For what we do in NEPA, right? You could, in theory, put in every state's regulations for water, for example, because they're all a little bit different, but you'd have to keep on top of it. You have to keep updating it. And that's really, really challenging. What was his solution for his beer app, right? It was, well, I live in Nashville, so I can go to these places and do this. I have a friend who lives in Charlotte. They can do that there. And so that's how you do it, right? You kind of take the collaborative effort. You're getting people who are in region to help. And when they travel and go other places, they can add to what they're doing. You're talking about science in general. You have your colleagues and they can kind of, again, collaborate. That's kind of the whole point. So there's always solutions out there for difficult problems.
Yeah. And I think too, to your point, you don't have to try to change the world or write an entire plant atlas at once, baby steps. You can start small.
Yeah. Start in Nashville and in Charlotte, and eventually maybe you get more people. So.
Yeah. I mean, if it's a work solution, you can start either just in your agency or department, or you can start in your community. And then, if it works for you, then maybe you branch out to other communities too.
Yeah. Perfect example of that. Working right now, like one of the things that we stumbled upon an innovative tool for using story maps to tell basically tell a story of our projects, right? And we were already kind of doing that internally. We started doing it externally, and clients are like, oh, wow, this is really cool. We really like what you're doing here. Please do more of it. And that was a really nice little innovation. And from there, I'm like, okay, well, we could do this for everything we're doing and show that to lots of different people for lots of different reasons. So that's one of the things. We're hiring a new person here pretty shortly. You may know who she is, but that's one of the things that I want her to work with our team on, is to build that database of projects with story maps. And it's going to be really cool. And it's a happy accident, but there's just a little bit of innovation that came our way. Why not use it? Why not go forward with it? Yeah, it may only end up working for us, but it'll be great for us. At the very least, it'll be great for what we're doing internally. Hopefully it's helpful for others as well. But, there's already value in it.
It's all great. I think all those little improvements are better than just one giant improvement, which is sometimes people are thinking is innovation and what they need to do. But we have to keep trying to find some innovations for our podcast. So one of these days we'll get those field notes going.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get to our interview. Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Wesley Knapp, the Chief Botanist at NatureServe, which is a leading biodiversity conservation nonprofit in the United States. Thank you, Wesley. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and kick us off and tell us a little bit about what you do?
I am Chief Botanist at NatureServe, like you mentioned. And if you're not familiar with NatureServe, we work with 60 member programs across the United States and Canada to answer the three fundamental questions of biodiversity conservation, which are: what is it, where is it, and how is it doing? And we collectively provide the data that better be used for about every conservation decision in the United States and Canada.
So when did you get into conservation? How did you get to where you are now?
That's a bit of a story, but I got interested later in my career, as I got interested in field botany as an undergrad student. I was excuse the pun, a late bloomer to my love of nature. And I was lucky enough that right after undergrad from Catawba College, I landed my dream job being a field botanist for the Maryland Natural Heritage Program. And the Maryland Natural Heritage Program is a member program of the NatureServe Network. So if you're familiar with natural heritage programs, there's an equivalent in every state. And then in Canada, they're called CDCs, or Canadian Data Centers. So I had my dream job of just walking around in the woods and finding plants and trying to protect high quality natural ecosystems or natural areas. And then, I spent 15 years in the Maryland program. Then I moved to Western North Carolina, where I felt like I stepped into the big leagues because there's a lot of rare and endemic plants out here compared to the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And not to knock the Eastern Shore, it's just a different system. So that was really it. It was more academic. I didn't realize I'd love nature, but when I found out I could have a job where I worked outside all day and got to wander and discover, sign me up. But after 20 years or so of that, I moved on to a more of a desk job behind the scenes, trying to coordinate and motivate plant conservation.
So what was that transition like for you then? Was it hard to give up some of that field stuff?
Oh, of course it was, but it was a decision I weighed carefully because the analogy I give is I'm 43 now. And every great running back only has so many yards in them. Every great field botanist only has so many years of climbing up 4,000-foot elevation mountains like we have here in 6,000 feet elevation mountains like we have here in Western North Carolina. So there were days when I was younger, I'd do 5 days of field work and then say, all right, let's do another on the weekend.
Right.
At the end of my field career, I'd do like 3 days a week and say, man, this is really starting to grind on me.
Right. Oh, man. So I remember like, there's like a wetland that I still see in my mind as like, you know what? I don't have to do this every day. Did you have like a specific thing, or was it just kind of a gradual progression over time?
No, not at all. And trust me, I'm not near the end of my field career. I still do priority field work. Like we might talk about some of that stuff today, but it was more like, and I don't know how to explain this, but here's how I will explain it. I was at a meeting maybe in 2019, and I looked around the room and all my friends who I'd known from 20 years plus, we all had gray beards and wrinkles. And I realized, wow, we're like the established crowd now. When did that happen? Yeah. If anyone knew who I was, they might not think that way if they'd known me for the 20 years. Right. So it's one of those things you kind of realize you're becoming established and a leader in the field after a long time. And I love NatureServe, and I love what we do here. I think it's probably the most important conservation work that can be done in the country. Like, what is out there? Where is it? Is it doing okay? So putting the field work down was hard, but I also was kind of, I don't want to say fearful, but my friend Ann had the chief botanist position before I did, and she stepped down last year. And I got kind of like, well, who's going to get that job? I hope they really know what they're doing. And after a while, I said, you know what? Why couldn't I do that? And I had a bunch of people ask, hey, Wes, have you applied for that? And I was like, no.
Right.
And eventually I was like, yeah, maybe I should. And I'm really glad I did it.
That's so great. It's amazing to think about, like, you were questioning your own strength and experience, even though you're perfect for the job. And it's been working out for you.
Imposter syndrome is real for a lot of people, including you, right? But the flora of North America, like the US and Canada, is massive. It's like 24,000 species. No one person can know that. So if you don't come into a field like that with a big questioning or doubt, self-doubt, you're doing it wrong.
That's a really good point. It actually kind of leads into my next question about NatureServe, because I use your Explorer all the time. I think it's fantastic. I love the tool for exactly what you're talking about. I need to know, where things are, how they're doing, and a little bit about what they are as well.
Wait. What's this tool? I like tools.
Well, NatureServe Explorer is like that's a species list where you can type in literally any species, and it'll pop up. It'll give you all kinds of basic information, where it's been seen, what its habitat is, and where it occurs and all that fun stuff. So like, it's a really good tool, especially if you're trying to identify areas of concern for a project that we're looking at. So it's really cool for that. I love using it that way.
Is it for scientists or laymen's?
I mean, it's a website. Literally anyone can use it. We use it in the NEPA world for exactly what I'm talking about. We have to back up what we say. We can't just be like, you know what? Nothing's here, right? We're good. We didn't even check. We have to make sure we're doing it right. So that's why we use it. But I'm really curious. How does like the data you collect get onto that website?
So that's a really insightful question. So at NatureServe, I say what we do is conservation through collaboration, because we work with over 60 member programs across the US and Canada, but they're all their own little autonomous body. Mm-hmm. So we do data exchange with member programs through our centralized database called Biotics, where a member program, let's say North Carolina, where I worked, when I was a field botanist, I'd discover something, I'd map it geospatially in ArcView, that Esri product. It would suck into our database, which also has a geospatial component, maintain and update all the records, and then through data exchange ends up in NatureServe Central. So we have a centralized location of data for all the U.S. rare plants, animals, and high-quality habitats. Then here at NatureServe, we do the conservation status assessments. So you mentioned like the rarity of these organisms. We rank them 1 to 5, 1 being the most rare and 5 being the most common. But that rank can be G for global, N for national, or S for subnational, which we usually call a state rank here in the States, but technically subnational because they apply them in Canada as well. So you can go on now and with a degree of confidence know that the information you're seeing from Oregon is comparable to the information you're seeing in North Carolina. It's collected under the same methodology. We take into account rarity, threats, and trends. We have a standardized calculator to calculate those 1 through 5 ranks at the various tiers we talked about. So I'm glad you use that site because it truly is a wealth of information.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And knowing what goes into on the back end, there have to be challenges, right? You're talking 60 entities. So what are some of those challenges? How do you get through them?
Oh, man, there are so many. So we have a staff in our science information resources team who work for data exchange and quality control. But the challenges are so numerous because, I mean, most listeners probably won't understand this until I say it, but we don't have a good agreement about what plants surround us in the US and Canada. There's no one authoritative list. There's no one authoritative book. So like the flora of California can be interpreted differently between, the most recent floristic treatment by the Flora of California Committee or different when you look at the flora of North America. So reconciling names and the concepts behind these species really answer that question of what is it? Because if you don't have that right, every other question behind that decision is wrong.
Yeah, that's wild. And so you have this basic background information on, I'll say every plant. We know that's not true. Right? There's lots of different things going on. But you've also spent a lot of time studying plant extinctions. So what drew you to that, and how does that tie into what you do?
So I got interested in that early in my career. So 2001, I started with the Maryland Natural Heritage Program as that field botanist, like I mentioned. And I was quickly over my head. Like my job is to go out and quickly identify every plant in the field and know what's rare. Whoa, I'd never even walked in Maryland before. So I studied the Rare Plants of Maryland book a lot. Like every night I was studying that thing. And there was one plant in the Maryland flora that was considered GH or globally historic and extinct called Nuttall's micranthemum, which is found on Blackwater streams from New York to Virginia. And the story goes that it was not even thought to be rare. And then in the 1980s, heritage botanists from throughout the region were looking at the different plants in the flora, trying to figure out what's rare. And this one came up and everyone around the room just looked at each other like, oh, isn't it okay where you are? Haven't you seen it? And we realized no one had seen this plant since it was last collected in the 1930s. So I took it upon myself to learn everything I could about it and then to find it. But spoiler alert, it's extinct. I didn't find it. But I talked to other botanists at meetings I'd go to. Hey, what are the extinct plants in your state? And I'd usually get blank stares looking back at me because we didn't have an appreciation for what we'd lost. And I'm not an academic scientist. I'm a field conservation-based botanist. And I thought, well, if we don't know what we've lost, how do we know how to prevent the next extinction?
Right.
So I asked a whole group of botanists from across the country, hey, has this work ever been done? Am I missing it? And two, do you want to collaborate to do this? So we began this investigation to look at the extinct plants in the United States and Canada. And that's what that paper came out. And we showed, there were 53 extinct plants, 64 extinct taxa, if you include varieties and subspecies. We found that 64% were known from just one place on the planet. We call them single site endemics. So extremely narrow distributed species geographically are going disproportionately extinct. And that's led me to now address, so what are we going to do with this information? Well, we're going to prioritize plants of one known occurrence and try to get them protected in the field and what we call off-site conservation or ex situ conservation. So I got interested in just from a point of what can we learn from these conservation failures, which is an extinction, and then how do we prevent the next extinction? Because that's what conservation is all about, is preventing extinction, like the lowest bar for success we can set.
Right. And so you've had some successes and I'm assuming some failures as well, like finding a plant that you thought was something that you do a lot. Is it rare? Like where does it fall?
So rediscovering an extinct plant is an extremely rare event. Yeah. I've had a lot of success discovering extirpated plants. So plants that are thought to be locally extinct. For instance, we'll have something extinct in Maryland that I've rediscovered. So that's a rediscovery of an extirpated plant. But I was part of the rediscovery of an extinct plant this year, which was certainly a career highlight. And we looked for what they commonly call the late-leaved oak, Quercus tardifolia, which was endemic to a single place in Big Bend National Park.
Oh, yeah.
In Boot Canyon, which is a really remote area. It takes multi-hours to even hike to Boot Canyon. And that's the only place this tree had ever been found. And we went on a scouting trip a couple of years ago and found out that the location this tree was along a trail in a remote canyon near a spring. And I made the observation, there's no way that this tree was only known from this spot. It's just easy to survey that spot.
Right.
So we went back as a crew. This is a project, a collaboration with the U.S. Botanical Garden and the Morton Arboretum. But I think it was 9 of us from across the country came together. We went to Big Bend. We took pack mules way in multi-hours into where we stayed in Boot Canyon, and we explored for a week. And I'll never forget that it was like on a Wednesday, I think. We're walking through the woods like as a search party, maybe, 10 meters apart. And my friend Michael Eason, who literally wrote a book, The Wildflowers of Texas, he calls out, "Hey, Wes, you need to get over here." And I could tell in his voice, he found something good.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to show that guy any plant he doesn't know in the state of Texas.
Right.
So I walked over and immediately it's like, wow, we haven't seen this tree. That is clearly different than the 1,000 other trees we've seen at this point. So we kind of got the group around and we confirmed, we looked at the old historical collections and we knew what it was supposed to look like. And it was even getting goosebumps, thinking about that experience in the field. But those are really rare moments, but extremely exciting moments.
So what happens after you find it?
So in this case, Adam Black, who's with Bartlett Tree Services, pointed out that this tree is really not doing well. The stump was recently burned over. There was a fungal infection and had a bunch of little tiny branches coming out of the main trunk, which is atypical and a sign of poor health. So we've decided to do some ex situ collections, or those offsite collections. So we're taking a bunch of cuttings. We're going to graft them to other trees, grow them out. So we have an offsite stock, because we were only able to find one tree despite our week of survey. Yeah. So once we have a collection offsite, we have options. Do we put some back at the same place where this plant's found now? Maybe not, because that is probably a sky island that's really changing. It's drying out, more fire, probably not conducive for that species' long-term viability. But we can put it back at lower elevation places that are a little more sheltered, perhaps. Or frankly, who knows what the future will hold for what we do with those collections, but we have options. And that's the first important step, is to have options.
Wow, that is so cool. That's too cool, actually. No, that's really, really incredible. And I'm assuming too that sometimes when you're doing that work, you find new species maybe that you weren't even trying to find while you're out there. So is that really something you set out to do when you go look for these rare plants? And Big Bend is remote, people. It is very remote. He's not joking. So do you have this as an idea? Okay, we're looking for this extinct plant, but we're also looking for new plants.
So there's always a specific reason you're doing your field work. And in this case, it was to rediscover Quercus tardifolia, but also look at these other oaks in Southwest Texas that are really difficult to identify. And they also may be very rare if they're real species. And that was part of the reason we went down there, was to collect specimens and do some studies. But you never put your blinders on as a field botanist. Your job is to inventory, even if you're looking, let's say I'm looking for just one specific orchid at this site. I'm looking at the flora, and my job is to understand it all basically on site, or to collect a specimen of something that puzzles me. Because the more and more time you spend in your region as a botanist, the better you're at just site identifying all the plants. And when you get to that point, and this sounds ridiculous to say because there's so many plants, but this is a fine skill that field botanists spend their careers honing. So if they go out and find something that's a non-intended target, or a bycatch for a survey for a specific orchid, heck yeah, that's a great day. And of course you're going to collect data on that.
And then brag to all your friends?
Well, it's all my plant friends who care. I'll put something on social media, and there's not a day where I post something that's a celebration of something scientific, and my mom just writes back, "Geek." So that's obvious.
Oh, your mom and my mom would get along.
Yeah.
True love.
Oh, that's great. It makes me think, though, when I first started my career, I was doing a lot of wetland plant identification and trying to learn them all. For those people who are getting into this, how does someone even go about? What's the best practice for trying to learn these plants?
So I was super fortunate in that I was paid to do it as a professional. I got my undergrad degree. I focused in field botany, and I was decent in the Piedmont in North Carolina, where I got educated. But then I had to move to a new place and reinvent all the plants I knew by sight. And there's no surrogate for experience. That's plain and simple. You can go online and look at plant photos and get in plant identification forums and use INAT and all those kind of things. But the truth is, you have to spend a ton of time in the fields, frankly, struggling with plant identification. So if you're not familiar with how plants are identified, scientifically, we have manuals and floras, and then you have keys, which are there are 2 questions posed at a time. You're supposed to work your way through flowers pink, flowers white, whatever the question.
Right.
But that's hard to do because there's so many plants. So you if you can do it right, you want to learn your families by site inspection. So that's something in the rose family. And that saves you a lot of time in keying a plant. And then you can go to the roses and just start working with your key. But there's no way to just download this kind of information. But I will say, from my experience, I learned a lot faster when I'm with someone who really knows what they're doing. Yeah. So back early in my career, I was paired up with Ron Wilson, who just passed away, but he was a local botanical legend on the eastern shore of Maryland. And he taught me a lot of rare plants that would have taken me years to learn if I had to collect and key everything out myself. So mentors in education really go a long way for plant ID.
Awesome. That's good information. Is it all just visual and using the keys, or is when you discover a new species or something you think has never been identified before, is there also some level of genetic or a lab evaluation?
Oh, absolutely. So what we're talking about is the level of information needed to make a decision. So when you're a field botanist going out in the woods, 99+% of everything you see is going to be something you're familiar with or something you know to look for. In those rare instances where I've discovered a new species, and I've been a part of 5 discoveries that we've published, and we have a number of new species coming out still. Every time it's been a matter of I'm walking through a site and all of a sudden I see this plant and I'm like, what is that? I know what genus it's in, but I can't tell you what that is. And that doesn't happen very often. Like, I'm usually pretty good about knowing what the thing is in the field. So then you have to ask yourself, all right, is it something new to the state that I'm not considering, something I haven't seen before? So you go to the keys and you look and you're like, none of this really fits. Because we do use our eyeballs as our primary mode of interacting with the world. And that's called the morphologic species concept, the way plants look. But if you want to describe a new species, it's always best to have some genetic data. So, like, for instance, I'm working with collaborators right now at UNC Chapel Hill and Missouri Botanical Garden, and we're trying to name a whole bunch of new things to science. And it's going to be, here's the visual kind of information, but also here's some molecular data showing it's not related to the other things out there in the world.
Awesome.
Very neat.
So you're obviously the expert in your field at this point in time. The book is called Vascular Plants of Maryland, USA, a comprehensive account of the state's botanical diversity, which is freely available through the Smithsonian, which is very cool. So what brought you to writing or being part of writing this book?
All right, where to begin with that question? So I started that book when my daughter was born in 2007. And it was such a massive undertaking, I didn't finish it until 2022.
Wow.
I remember starting it on paternity leave because I took a full paternity leave with my daughter. And it was born out of frustration. I'd go out in the field, I'd find some plant I didn't recognize, and then I'd go to the only books we had, which were like Brown and Brown, which was written in 1972 for the woody plants and 84 for the herbaceous plants. And routinely, this would not be in that book. But then I'd go online and find different weird attributions of this plant to the state. And I realized that we don't even know what's in Maryland.
Right.
If we need a comprehensive list, because that's like what I mentioned before. What is it? Where is it? How's it going? How's it doing? So the what is it is the culmination of that book. What plants are actually found in Maryland? Because then from there, you can make other decisions. And while doing that book, we found lots of plants that were rare that we weren't tracking in the state. We found things to exclude, like things that had been attributed to the flora, but the specimens are identified wrong, or it was just based on the literature or whatever it is. So that is like step one foundational information for the flora of Maryland. And it was just born out of frustration with like not being able to know objectively what plants were in the state.
That's awesome. Was it fun to do?
Fun's a rough word. It was fun to me. Yeah, it was fun to me. It was intellectually stimulating, but that project really wasn't a work project. Like, I did that a lot on night and weekends, and I finished it while I worked for the North Carolina program. So there's a lot of my personal time invested in it. So I'm sure there's some level of fun in that, but it was more that I knew we needed it as a community, and I knew no one else was doing it. So I just said, all right, I'm going to do this big thing because it has to be done. And then my co-author, Rob Noxie, he's at the New York Botanical Gardens. He was my master's advisor. And he's been just foundational for my career. And he's revising the Gleason and Cronquist Manual, which is the flora of the northeastern United States and adjacent Canada. So we had an interest of actually knowing what plants were in Maryland instead of perpetuating the same old literature or incorrect information.
Awesome. How big is this book? How many vascular plants are there in Maryland?
Oh, you put me on the spot. Let me... I'm going to grab my copy off the shelf here because we had to summarize these data in the introductory text. But let's see. Yeah. So we discuss 3,525 taxa, document 2,918 established to the state of Maryland, 71% of which were native and 28% that are not native. And what we do is this is a checklist. So you're not going to use this to identify plants in the field. But we give the scientific name, common name, if it's native or not, the rank, like how rare it is in the state. But we also cite a specimen for each plant in this book. So there's proof that this thing occurs there. And that because, names change over time. Like someone might recently, someone reevaluated the ladies' tresses orchids and they found, what was being called one species is 5. And there's more than one in Maryland. So now you can go back to the specimen, figure out which one that is. And then you can find out what the other ones are in your state as well.
That's awesome.
That's so awesome.
You've also been featured on PBS, maybe not you yourself. I don't know if I have all the details here, so correct me if I'm wrong, on the U.S. tree assessment. What is that? How did it end up on PBS?
Tell me about it. I never thought I'd end up on PBS. So that was a really interesting exercise that I came into kind of late because I started at NatureServe in November. And there was an assessment to try to figure out what are all the trees in the United States, where are they, and how are they doing? Like those 3 basic questions. And this was run through the U.S. Botanical Garden and the Morton Arboretum. And I was kind of late to this, but NatureServe was a critical component because we apply those conservation ranks, like the G1s, G2s, et cetera. So we looked at all the trees in the U.S. and Canada, and we found, first we provided a checklist of all the trees, which wasn't readily available. Like, isn't that surprising? We didn't even know what trees were in the country. So we provided a checklist of all the trees, and then we mapped some things. We looked at threats and trends, and we found, if you might not know this, but the Southern Appalachians are a hot spot for trees. So like Georgia comes out really high for endemic trees. Florida and California are high. And then we looked at non-endemic trees, which are trees found, outside of the U.S. and in the United States, and like California and Florida are super high again. We looked at the threats, and as you can imagine, human anthropogenic causes are a big threat, and disease, invasive species, big threats. So we're going to see a lot of changes to our tree flora over the years. And that was the point of the assessment. It's kind of a snapshot in time to see how things are doing. And I really wish we had one of these from like the year 1900. So it'd be fascinating to see how different the world is today. But someone, in 100 years might pick up this tree assessment that was published this year and say, wow, things have really changed since 2022.
Cool. This year. So this was recently on PBS?
Yeah, this was very recently. So the tree assessment came out, I want to say September. It's a freely available publication we did in Plants, People, Planet. And the humbling part was like the media announcement. Like I've been involved in various media successes before. I hate talking about myself like this. Hate it. I'm making sure that's clear. You probably think I know. My friends will give me a hard time.
No. We're keeping that in.
I've been featured. My work has been featured in the New York Times and the Washington Post, but PBS is like a different level of shock and awe almost. I remember when the host came on, Jeff Bennett, I'd seen him on my magical video box in the living room on PBS and MSNBC for years. And all of a sudden, like I got to show the family that piece that they did, which was really great. And it featured one of my friends, Murphy Westwood from the Morton, and my friend Johnny Townsend from the Virginia Natural Heritage Program, because I did a field component too. And it was really amazing. And what got me the most exciting was when my daughters shared a photo of that on their Instagrams, like my dad.
Wow, yeah.
Your dad. Like, oh, for a 15-year-old to say that, you're doing something right.
Yeah. Wow. We should ask
awesome.
you more questions about himself now, right? Is that what we should do?
No, not enough of that.
I want to see the TV series, My Botanist Dad.
Yeah, right.
We're always coming up with new TV shows over here. But now it's time for Field Notes, which is also like the show we want to see. You have tons of field experience and you've already told us some great stories, but you've worked in Australia, Canada, Central America. So give us one or two of your favorites.
That's a hard question. All right, here's one. Because this ties in really well with your audience. Back in Maryland, I was involved with environmental review, which is the process by which we use to flag special places and prevent them from being destroyed with a project. Now, I can't get into all the details for various reasons on this, but we went to this place that we had circled on the maps in the Heritage Program for like 20 years that we want to eventually get on, but we could never get landowner permission. And we got out there because they wanted to basically destroy the place. And within minutes, found the biggest population of a federally listed plant in the state, and then found a new plant, the Pine Barrens death camas to the state, and maybe 10 other rare plants. The habitat by which all these things were occurring, we think is undescribed to science. So the habitat itself, we didn't even know what to do with it. We called it the endless seep because it was just this terraced amazing seepage of water pouring out of these streams outside of Baltimore. And then my friend who studies subterranean aquatic organisms found we call them scuds. He found a new scud to science from this site. So discovery can be really anywhere. And that's what I loved about my fieldwork the most is you never know what's up the next hill or up the next creek. And I've been so fortunate to have so many of those, oh my God moments that it never got old, and which was really the hard part of putting the field career down.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Your first time in the field, the first time you had to go identify stuff for work, were you like bringing the key with you? Like, okay, this is a plant and that's all I've got. Like, what was that like that first time?
So I can remember this. The first day as a professional, I was set out to update a rare plant occurrence for a plant called Carex vestida. And that's a sedge. So if you don't know Carex, it's the most diverse group of plants in the eastern United States. Yeah. In Maryland, I think there's over 200 species of Carex.
Right.
So it was and I don't know that, especially as a young botanist, you don't know those plants. Like that's how you tell a real professional, in my opinion, is that they don't shy away from grasses, sedges, and rushes, right? Because those are really hard. They have small, tiny little flowering parts, and they have unique terms for their flowering parts that you see in the books. And I remember we had a map of where this plant's going to be. So the first hurdle was, how do I even get to this site? Because like we undervalue how long it takes sometimes to even get to the place you need to get to. And then when I finally got there, I find a couple sedges, because sedges, you're not just going to find one, you're going to find a whole bunch of them. And then sometimes, so within sedges, there's so many, we've broken them down into sections and that looks similar. You'll find more than one species in that section. So I just remember being kind of overwhelmed. And I had this book, Maryland, the Vascular Plants of Maryland, in my backpack. And all of a sudden I'm like, what does the word Paraginia mean? Like, I don't even know what these terms are that are critical for the identification of this plant. So there was enough of all the different species that I collected like a representative of different ones, and I mapped different ones so I knew what collection went with what. And then I went back to the office, and the state botanist there, Chris Fry, my friend, gave me my first lesson in Carex identification. And Chris actually wrote the book, The Atlas to the Sedges of Maryland. So there was no better teacher at that point to teach me these plants. And that's going to be my mentorship. It would have taken me years to understand Carex morphology because it's a hard group of stuff. But he was able to kind of hold my hand and bring me up to speed on how to do that. But it is super intimidating if you've never seen a plant and you have 184 options. Right. Like, how do you know you're seeing the right one?
Yeah. Okay.
Where do I start? Okay.
That's fantastic. Have you had any like scary moments or exceptionally funny moments?
I can think of a scary moment.
It is Halloween today, right? So like scary stories, bring them on.
Big plants and scary stories. The most intense field moment I ever had was my friend Pete and I, who I actually went to college with. He got a job in the Maryland program soon after I did. But we're fast forward in like 2008 maybe. One of our jobs was to inventory this plant, the Echinonome virginica, sensitive joint veg is the name of the plant, the sensitive joint veg. But this is a hard plant to inventory. It's found in very high quality stream systems. And these are tidal stream systems. So at high tide, you can access them, but at low tide, you're stuck. You're going to be stranded forever. So to get to this site is a real long journey, multi-miles and about. It takes a long time. So we finally get to this site. And the way to inventory this is you have a jumbo boat and you have to like lift and lower the motor routinely to kind of get the boat up into the marsh. You can use binoculars to look out over the marsh and count this plant, which can stand like 6 feet tall. So it's kind of up above the vegetation, even though it's not very shallow. Well, at one point, the motor shut off. Oh, no. At one point, Pete pulled the cord to start the motor, but the cord wouldn't retract. But the motor was running. He's like, you just keep counting and I'll deal with the motor. I'm like, okay. So I'm looking with my hands and all of a sudden I hear, oh, like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, I don't think so. So I lower my binoculars and look over and he's holding his thumb and blood is just pouring down his hand.
Oh, no.
I was like, oh, no. So I go over, I'm like, what's going on? And he opens his hand and I can see the bone sticking out the side of his thumb.
Mm.
And the motor shut off, by the way. The cord is still sticking out of the motor. So there's no way for me to start this motor. So I had to call 911. Thankfully, I had cell signal. I took off my shirt. He wrapped up his thumb. I paddled it to the closest road intersection where we met an ambulance and I took Pete away. Then I had to get the motor started. And the medics told me, oh, it's going to be hours. This guy's going to be in surgery, blah, blah, blah. So I finished the inventory. It took me multiple hours. Go back, load up the boat, go to the hospital. And they didn't even work on him yet. They were like, we're going to send you to Mount Sinai, which was like an hour and a half drive away because they're on the eastern shore of Maryland. Right. So that's my most intense field story, is that my buddy almost lost his thumb.
Wow. But he's good. He's all good now?
He's good now. His thumb looks gross, but it's okay. He's going to kill me when he hears me say it.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, you can owe him a beer. That's our next segment. We cannot let you go without talking about craft beer, because seriously, all environmental professionals just love craft beer. I really don't know what that's all about, but it's fine with me. So you love it so much that you manage your own website in your limited free time. Is that correct?
Well, I co-manage it. My Bob, Kelly, and I do that for fun. I introduced Bob to craft beer a few years ago. And it's funny because Bob has the palate of a child. Like, he worked for the military. Like, he'd be in Paris and he'd be eating McDonald's. It's like, what?
Come on.
I'm not joking, but he loves craft beer. And I think that was like a mutual fun thing for us. And now I live in Asheville and he lives down in Charlotte, and I don't have a lot of free time. But we got talking one day about what we need as a community is not just, there's tons of information out there about what beer is amazing. What's the next thing to hunt? But we wanted to know about the spot. Like, is it good for kids? Do you have a food truck? What's your merch situation? Do you have games? So that's what the angle we kind of take. And every time I travel for work, like this year I was in Denver, so I went to True, which was amazing. I went to Anchorage in Anchorage, Alaska. So every time I work, I inventory a space for craft beer spots. Heck, Bob's over in the Netherlands right now, and he sent me pictures from Cantillon and all sorts of world-class breweries. And as we mentioned before, Asheville is an embarrassment of riches. And there's like 38 breweries in the county. So it's hard I can't even keep up with my limited free time. And Charlotte even has more than that. So he's done a great job of inventorying all the spots in Charlotte. And I'm kind of behind in Asheville because, not only am I Chief Botanist at NatureServe, I'm also in a Ph.D. program at UNC Chapel Hill, and I have 2 teenage daughters. So the times I drink, I don't want to make it homework.
Right.
But the website's a lot of fun just to introduce people to spots.
That's awesome.
Great idea.
If we didn't say it, it's craftbeerspots.com.
Thank you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Craftbeerspots.com. Do you have a favorite spot and or flavor?
My favorite spot in Asheville is Burial. Burial is just a world-class brewery here in town. And after the demise of Wicked Weeds, I say that jokingly because they got bought by Budweiser. So they're dead. Burial is the place I go to. We also have a Yokoa, which is a really nice spot along the river. They have a great food truck, great free range to kids kind of thing. But I can't say what I am on this podcast actually because of profanity, but there is no style I won't drink. I'm very open to about any beer style, but I'm really seasonal. So like I'm coming out of like double IPA season and moving into stout and porter season.
Nice.
Yeah, that's so great. And we're running out of time here, Wes, but it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. Is there anything else you want us to talk about before we let you go?
Yeah, I'll give a shameless plug that NatureServe is a conservation nonprofit. And our data is used by all sorts of groups to make decisions. Governmental, non-governmental, TNC, like everybody incorporates the G ranks into their decision making. And we struggle at times to find the resources to do those conservation status assessments. So we do have donors. We do have an adopt a species program. If you love a species, you can adopt it and have some feature on our website. So just, if you have philanthropic members, we are always looking for resources to do the work we do.
Excellent. And so before we let you go, tell the people where they can reach out to you.
Yeah, so I'm available at wes@natureserve.org. I maintain a website, wesley-knapp.com. And other than that, if you just look for WM Knapp, you can find my Insta, Facebook, etc. All the things are out there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Wes.
My absolute pleasure.
That's our show. Thanks, Wes, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
See you, everybody.